We saw Demon Hunter getting 0-3'd in the previous series of Tom60229, so I was just looking up the overall stats, including all the games off stream. It is currently running at 51% overall, which I do think is something that needs to be kept an eye on, because I do think people have planned more and more for OTK Demon Hunter coming into the format as time has gone on. As that APAC lineup has picked up, as people have started to understand that no one's bringing Paladin anymore, people are bringing OTK Demon Hunter in that spot instead. A few allowances have been given to that, and I just want to keep an eye on whether that causes OTK Demon Hunter's win rate to drop a little bit. But while I'm here on the class win rate page, before we get into the start of this series, just want to give a shout out to the perennial underperformer Warlock with its 23% win rate so far in Masters Tour. What a deck. Why people keep playing Warlock is beyond me, Raven.
Yeah, we'll have to have words with Yala later on at some point. But diving straight into this one, Viper has not really one of those great hands. The Octo is there, but there's no payoff, right? There's none of that sort of turn 3 to 4 plays. Yes, Kazakus could be played a little bit earlier, but it often doesn't accomplish much as opposed to just having a 3-3 on board that one turn before. Whereas Maverick, on the other hand, this hand's shaping up pretty well. That skull very easily going to be shifted across to the far left.
Yeah, already a consideration or two as to whether you just want to get rid of Throwglaive while you can, just in case there aren't suitable minions to throw it at on the following turns. But Maverick decides not to. Also decides not to proc the Octobot, which is usually a contentious issue. Obviously, the pros and cons. Pro, you give your opponent one less card to be discounted on, minimum. Con, you kind of activate it for them if they don't have a Guardian Org Merchant or something else in their hand in order to activate it with. So Maverick choosing the I call your bluff line here, essentially, just going face with the hero power and saying, Viper, you must have an activator in your hand in order to deal with this.
Yeah, whenever I face this, I normally act like proc it for my opponent, if I can, easily, of course. And honestly, it just feels like 50% of the time I regret it, 50% of the time I don't. So it is one of those weird decisions to make, isn't it? And I still, after playing against Rogue countless times, still don't really know where I fall on it in general. But we can see what's been reduced now. That cheap Vanessa Van Cleef might come in clutch. But most importantly, Secret Passage being 0 just means that Viper can kind of re-roll his hand a lot easier on any given turn, right? Like even next turn, he has a full 4 mana to spend if he so chooses.
Yeah, very true. Does mean just with the discounts that we see here from Viper that just Kazakus into Vanessa would have been particularly powerful here against Eldrazi Warblades coming down. I think that would be a reasonably good pickup just for some extra burst damage. But I imagine that might just be the turn that we see here anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the same play is still kind of good about against Eldrazi Warblades coming down later because you'll get an ooze from the Vanessa.
Yikes. Immediate shake of the head from Viper, and I think very fairly so in this situation. Missed on Stealth, missed on Divine Shield, and then missed on Summon a Copy with the Golem as well, which some combination of those things is generally what you are going for against Demon Hunter.
Now, do you like committing where he can go Vanessa here and then the Plunderer just to completely clear the board, put on as much pressure as possible?
Yeah, it's awkward, right? Like, if you'd have just given me a Divine Shield, Summon a Copy Golem, I absolutely would have taken it here and then gone for the extremely aggressive line that you are describing, because then you have refill number 1 with the Divine Shield Golem straight afterwards. And then you also have refill number 2 with the Secret Passage after that. However, if this board goes out as aggressive as it has done here from Viper, he's really struggling for refills after this point, I think. But instead, I think he's just hoping that this sticks. And then, yes, exactly, that is a +2/+2 Golem that he's ended up taking from the Kazakus there, which is just kind of banking on getting through some damage in this spot.
And you know what? Even though this Kazakus is going to be cleaned up, Maverick not going for Immolation or any kind of bigger clay with that and Throwglaive, it's going to pay off for Viper. This is a very significant push.
It is. It is indeed. So there will be 3 5-health minions, 1 with a Divine Shield left on this board after the fact, which means even like Immolation Aura and Throwglaives are not going to get the job done here, because that'll only be 4 damage apiece on the minions, meaning it won't be able to repeat. So yeah, Maverick in a spot of bother here for sure.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, the big cards that are missing here are Arcanist or Moarg, right? Where Maverick can't gain that just huge increase in extra damage for Immolation or Fellscreen Blast, depending on what he wants to do, even Throwglaive, arguably. So the fact that he's just got no minions that are going to help him clear this, this is a lot of pressure. And then Viper does have that secret passage for free next turn to try and, re-roll the hand into something more aggressive.
I mean, crucially, Jandis, right?
Sure.
Is just hittable on the following turn from that 0-mana secret passage, which, as weird as this is going to sound, because it obviously looks like the Maverick is in a really bad position because of the play he made. I actually really respect the play that he made in not using an Immolation Aura on what was a fairly innocuous-looking board at the start. Because there's kind of mind games that goes into this, right? Like, you generally don't take +2/+2 as a matter of priority in this matchup. You take Summon a Copy as your first choice a lot of the time, right? So they don't often have +2/+2 in hand. Plus, if you throw out Immolation Aura willy-nilly, like he's been forced to here, then suddenly cards like Jandis and cards like when the field contact turn comes down, that's when you get punished. Because generally in this matchup, you need Immolation Aura number 1 to deal with Jandis. You need Immolation Aura number 2 to deal with the big field contact board that comes down. You can't really afford to use one on just your opponent's turn 3 board that they've made out of nowhere, right? So I really respect the greed that Maverick's put together here. Just so happens that Viper's just had the juice here. What looked like a fairly innocuous opening hand has just kind of hit the gas here.
Yeah, that's it. Against Rogue, you're kind of always expecting some kind of second wave refill, no matter what shape. But this is about as bad as it was going to get.
That's a pretty sick skull given the situation, though. Like, don't get me wrong. Maverick is not in a good position here, but in terms of outs his skull could hit there, that's pretty up there. Because he gets a huge heal from the Arcanist and the Fellscreen Blast. He can potentially tank the damage from the Quillbore here, which he does on the 1/3, and then he gets outcasted Spectral Sight at the end of all of that as well. Now, Viper is rightly upset with how good that skull ended up being, but he has to recognize he's still in a very good position here, right? Because that's 2 Fellscreen Blasts already used by turn 6 from his opponent. And that's all 3 discounted skull cards used immediately, right? So from Viper's position, Maverick is so far from a win condition right now that I think Viper can afford to take some time to rebuild here.
And even the I-Beam at the end, right? That's even more. Is going to be pushed here and then lost for Maverick. And it is all just about defense right now. But you are right. Maverick swiftly running out of ways to actually finish this game. And Viper doesn't have a great hand. He is going to use that 0-mana secret passage to dig a little bit deeper and try and get that in the form of the field contact cult neophyte. There you go. So, you know what, Saul? I'm going to say it's completely fair. Great skull there from Maverick. Great passage from Viper. We're all fine.
Oh, and a filthy fireball picked up there off the One Thief. Now, the Shadow Step question, the perennial Shadow Step question, is going to go with the Neophyte here, which I do respect. This is generally my Shadow Step of choice in the matchup. But I think One Thief there would have been fairly tempting as well, just to go digging for a Mask, another Fireball, and a Pex's Blast, a Runed Orb, just some source of extra damage to start chucking at face.
And now some questions are going to be asked here for Maverick. Can he defend against what we can see? Not only the board itself, but a Fireball in hand to then follow up with an Alexstrasza the turn after. There is so much damage available for Viper. And like you said earlier, Viper knows Maverick's used so much healing that it's unlikely he can withstand this.
Demons. Demons.
It's so funny to me watching this game where like Viper has just been winning by miles at all points, and he's just looks so frustrated about it as well. It's just like, I'm only winning this game by 3.3 miles. I want to be winning by 3.4.
We could already be in game 2 right now. So that's 7 so far. Where do you land here on potentially just going wide with the Foxy Fraud potentially, and just Tenwu in the Neophyte again?
Yeah, I think any play this turn that involves Temuing the Neophyte, I am on board for. He does also have Shadow Step, Secret Passage after all of that to go looking even for Shadow Step to then potentially do it all again. But I really think Viper should just focus as heavily as possible on Disruption here with this turn that involves Cult Neophytes.
Yeah, even with this turn, there's still Fireball, 10 Wound Neophyte, right? Which looks pretty good to me.
Yeah, I'm tempted to just go Temu Neophyte Secret Passage for more stuff at that point. You still have the other Neophyte in your deck and a Shadow Step in your deck to be able to, play more Neophytes this turn. Just make life even more awkward for your opponent.
I guess I'm just thinking that spend the Fireball, get it done, and then if Alex doesn't kill him next turn, something miraculous has to have happened, right?
Yeah, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen, right? Because I'm saying protect this board that you have with your life. That way you'll get some minion damage through on the following turn, and Alexstrasza can end you. I don't have too many objections to just chucking the Fireball either in that position. Actually, on reflection, I think because exactly both Fellscream Blasts have already been used, this is probably the better way to do it, because you're presenting a double threat here, right? Where you're saying you have to clear the board and heal, which initially my mentality says, well, that's not a hard thing for Demon Hunter to do because they do both of those things with one card, right? They just do that with Fellscream Blast. But since they're both gone, suddenly you're asking for the last I-Beam and the second Immolation Aura to be used this turn just to prevent the lethal. So I really like it.
Yeah, and this is just going to be game number 1. Even before we talk about Alexstrasza, there was just lethal on board at the end of that turn. So Viper getting off to a good start there and just doing the rogue things, like we said, just piling on a good amount of pressure, having that refill. Of course, the Jandis off the top helped a lot. And Maverick just had to commit a ton of resources just to stay alive, never mind to progress his game plan to actually winning with that big combo there. So really good start there for Viper. Obviously felt a little bit hard done by the skull, but I think his whole game made up for it.
It did. A little bit, yeah. I think, again, I do respect the line of play that Maverick took. I'm sure there are some onlookers being like, oh, well, you should have cleared the board there, right? It's like, when you're watching a Battleground stream and the streamer loses like a 0.5%, and then the chat starts telling them what they should have done differently. No, they shouldn't have done anything differently. They lost a 0.5%. They were 99.5% favored to win from that position. And I think in the majority of the scenarios, the greed from Maverick there to not clear up the board would have paid out for him. It just so happened that he kind of got punished by not only the exact golem, the +2/+2 that punishes him, but then also the incredibly powerful follow-up, which was the top deck Jandis that came afterwards, right? And don't get me wrong, Viper still had 4 more draws to go looking for that with the 0-mana Secret Passage that he had, but it still has to be those back-to-back threats to really punish Maverick for doing what he did. So I respect the way he played it.
It does mean now Viper's got his Warrior and this Token Druid left over with against Mavericks. Very similar lineup outside the Demon Hunter there. Just checking out the list, nothing's really standing out too far with either of these decks. I know that there are some slight differences in your approach to Rush Warrior, which we will see from both players if we see both lists, of course. But for now, looks like Viper's jumping over to his Token Druid, and to no real surprise, Sottle is just the extremely standard list we've come to expect from most players submitting this.
It is indeed, yeah. If you're allowing double Soul of the Forest to be standard, I suppose, because that isn't always a given. A little bit matchup dependent, I guess, in terms of 0, 1, or 2 Soul of the Forest in your deck, and then sometimes that opens up slots for additional cards like Guidance or Resizing Pouch, right, to be able to give yourself those X-Factor cards in a few matchups. But if you're looking at the 15-2 odds version of the deck, this is the most common one that you are going to be seeing. And Viper will be looking to draw some Gibblings, draw some Fungal Fortunes into Glowfly Swarms to get out of this one as quickly as possible.
Yeah, generally this is the starting point for Token Druid. Then you make maybe a few tweaks here and there, but you are right. And then Token Druid again is just one of those decks where there's very few matchups that you feel more unfavored against yourself, right? Of just how you can draw versus what your opponent even does. And we've seen it time and time again. There are the big blowout turns that have no answers. But on the other side of that, you know, Demon Hunter does have access to that AoE, even has the spot removal if, say, there's only a 2 to 3 Gibbling board. You can actually get rid of them, especially with those throw glaives that Maverick's playing that we saw from last game as well. So it's not completely one-sided here, and of course Viper does have to get some kind of strong opening that is going to be resistant to the big AoEs that Maverick can have access to.
It's also the rare breed of matchup, Raven, from the Demon Hunter side that you don't necessarily need to combo to win either. I think in quite a few positions you can just exhaust the Druid of resources and then play a few tempo Moargs, right? And there are extremely limited options in Druid, particularly when they're not playing Guidance or Resizing Pouch, to be able to deal with Moargs on the other side. So them being overstatted 2-drops can actually pay off. Wow! Did he whiff on more on 0? Okay, all right, that's actually unlucky. I'll give him that one.
Solo's confirmed you may have this one, and that is it. Oh wow, another bloom.
But we knew that because it was.
Oh sure, of course.
Yeah.
It's still funny.
That's how Guess the Weight works, right?
Yeah, Viper. Although he's looking bad, he's only like one good draw away from a good time right now because he has the mana and the solar to pretty much pull off some silly turns, but I mean, he does have to get the board generation.
That is also just the constant state of Druid, right? Like it's Schrodinger's pop-off. You just go without knowing, you just don't really know whether it can go off on any given turn or not. But there it is. There is the Gibbling, which is certainly one of those cards now. Has access to 8 total mana this turn, which does allow him to go Adorable Solar Pride, right? If he wants to dump everything. Is that nuts? It sounds nuts.
So I was looking at Soul the Forest, but I would have been wrong if I'd suggested that, because the thing you want versus Demon Hunter is super high health, right?
Yes.
Like you want health over every death rattles. Demon Hunter can deal with those. They can have multiple ways to AoE your board down. What they can't deal with is ridiculously high health.
Oh, this is so gross. Yep, exactly. That is it. Yep. Trees take the wheel, says Viper.
Okay, Immolation Aura, there's Arcanist. There are things.
He's fine. Yeah. He just needs to coin first so he doesn't eat it with his Arcanist, and then he just needs to give his Arcanist spell damage. Yep, this is exactly all he needs. Viper giving out the giggle. But yeah, when you let RNGesus take the wheel, sometimes you are going to get burned. Oof. And that has been the case for Viper here. He made his push. A full board of 3/7s on turn 4. Feels like you should be favoured to win the game. But yeah, Maverick needed a fairly specific 3-card combo, or within a particular range of different 3-card combos, to be able to answer that board, which is very unlikely for him to have. So Viper is going to get shut down for this one. It's going to be very hard for him to rebuild from this point. He's looking at almost exactly Fungal Fortunes or Guess the Weight #2 off the top next turn.
And that is where you often find yourself when you're playing Token Druid, right? You make a push. If it doesn't work and your hand's a little bit empty, if it's, you know, early in the game, then you are just like, okay, I need to draw Fungal Fortunes to refill some hand here to be able to actually make another board at some point in this game.
Right.
Maverick, on the other hand, has bought himself a lot of time. Let's go a little bit early. There's options of Kurt if he wants to just play a minion here. He clears off the one left on Viper's side of the board.
Yeah,
this Kurt on full health. I think I like that more than a card draw, honestly.
Yeah, it was an interesting proposition for sure. I think the card draw here is largely motivated by wanting to dump those philosophies sooner rather than later, so he can start getting Skull over to the left. So he wants to dig through his deck and actually hit Moargs to be able to duplicate. Because as I said, duplicated Moargs, especially from outcasted philosophies that give the buff, are actually extremely valuable in this matchup. So I'm down with the Sigil Runner, but I will admit my eyes did light up at the sight of Kurt Russell as well. But I do think drawing cards in the long run was pretty powerful there.
And one thing to note as well is that against Token Druid, if the board is empty, your health total pretty much doesn't matter.
Yes.
Unless it's 1, of course. But so Maverick trading there instead of going for the Kurt play, he's fine on 21, because any time he'll die from 21 is when he would probably die from 30 anyway at that point. So as long as he can keep this board clean, he's looking okay. Viper on the Discovers has not the best
so hear me out.
I've ever seen.
What if we just take Celestial Alignment?
I don't think it's going to make the game worse for Viper.
I don't think an extra Innovate is important. I feel like Celestial Alignment is at least something where, you might be in that position where like you build the board and you're threatening lethal, but you just die the next turn, right? Like you have the read on your opponent's hand. It's like, this hand kills me next turn. At least then Celestial Alignment can just defend your board. Kind of planning to use Celestial Alignment like you use one of those weird tempo lock Elusias, right? Where you just build a board and then you just play Elusia to deny your opponent from having any removal, so you end the game. It's just kind of where my head's at with the Celestial Alignment as well. Because like you said, like, game plans A through M are just out the window right now for Viper, right? Like, he needs to do something ridiculously creative to find a way across the finish line in this matchup, and it feels like Celestial Alignment was the only one of those cards that was ever going to come close to achieving it.
Demons? Demons.
Time for Tempo Il'gynoth. Kind of like a big Moarg, right?
Yeah, I mean, the tempo question is very interesting, because you saw on the previous turn, Maverick just hardcast the Skull from the middle of his hand, which kind of goes to show you that he's valuing the idea of philosophy over the discounts from his Skull. Like, he doesn't just want to start throwing away philosophy, and there you go, immediately, Moarg, okay, now we can actually get these things cast. Because Maverick had the option to just burn these philosophies and then eventually play an outcast Skull from the left. But he really is valuing, as I said all the way back at the beginning of the matchup, how powerful these Moarg Artificers end up being.
My next question is, does he actually just I-beam here?
Why?
Just because he gets the outcast on the philosophy again, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, sure.
Still pretty scary board, and Viper has to do miraculous things here to fight back because, well, that helps.
Sure does. Needs Luna as a bare starting point, does not find it, still has a chance. Okay, both Feral Rage and Moon-Touched Amulet can deal with the Moarg, but that just ends up being your whole turn, so I'm assuming you're just leaving a Moarg alive and praying this turn, but that feels utterly miserable.
And the problem is, if you don't kill the Moarg, then what's the turn anyway, right?
Yeah.
Like, is the turn just trash anyway, so you may as well take Feral Rage and kill the Moarg?
Trying to work out if there's some kind of win condition with Solar and one of the 4 damage cards that you can try and sneak up on your opponent if they don't have the kill on this turn, but even that seems like a long way from actually happening here. I just don't see it. I'm just not seeing the win condition here for Viper whatsoever.
I think realistically, it's more likely to have been like Cenarian Ward with Solar. Could have done something crazy, right? Like, that's probably what would have been the best pick if it was offered. Would you like your Moargs with some Moargs?
I mean, yeah, take your pick, right? What, 16 is needed after the attacks? That's not very much.
It's one of those fair numbers we talk about with OTK Demon Hunter.
Yep.
Now it's going to be game number 2 here. Maverick fighting back, and it didn't look good. It actually looked like Viper was going to get off to a very quick 2-0 there, but it was answered. That early Gibbling board with the insane health was just about dealt with from Maverick, so did recover there. matches all even now, and Maverick probably just breathing a bit of a sigh of relief after that game number 2, because from turn 4 that did look very scary.
Yeah, it would have been a very easy game to just run away with the series, right? Like a board full of 4/7s on turn 4, but again, this is, yeah, exactly. That gesture is just what Token Druid does to the game of Hearthstone, right? Like, Viper made his one meaningful decision of the matchup of whether or not to make a board full of 3/7s. He chose the yes option, and then he lost the game. Like, that was basically all of the meaningful interactions that happened in that entire game. But that's just what Token Druid will do to a man. Like, this is your brain on Token Druid. And I think, going back to the intro to the series, and I said that, that no one really disputes that Token Druid will win you 51% of your games or whatever your target is. It has a good win rate objectively. It's just some players just really can't vibe with it on a level of, like, I don't feel like I have the agency. I don't feel like my skill expression as a player is coming across here. Not to mention that isn't the only concern, right? And that lineups have purposes and they need to form a cohesive unit and target a particular deck, right? And sometimes Token Druid doesn't fit into that. But it is a very bizarre deck and one of the most polarizing decks that we have seen in the history of Hearthstone so far.
Both in gameplay and opinion as well. So we'll see how that works out in the future. But that does leave both these players with those warriors on either side. But then that Rogue versus Token Druid as well matchup that we might have. It looks like Maverick is going to be jumping over now to that Rush Warrior. And looking at this list overall, looks fairly standard to me, Sottle. The Mutinous is in there, which is one of the newer additions, of course, and Maverick choosing to stick with that Troublemaker build of Rush Warrior, because there are players who are sort of adventuring more towards the Frenzy with even Salfang, Kresh, of course, as well.
Yes, certainly this does look like the new normal, with Mutinous coming in, taking the place of one Warmaul Challenger. Warmaul Challenger, which I strangely called Bloodsworn Mercenary earlier on today. I've clearly just got No Hands Warrior on the brain, as those two cards generally worked very well together in combination. But yeah, I think Rush Warrior has been a real surprise to me. When it first appeared, I didn't really feel like the deck was going to have long-term legs. It felt like one of those decks that was a nice idea, but because it was so linear, it did one thing, right? And it did it very well. It played efficient rush minions and it buffed up the hand. And generally, hand buff has always been too slow in the history of Hearthstone. I just asked Brian Kibler. The man has buffed more cards in his hand than any other Hearthstone player alive up to this point, I'm sure. But it really has stood the test of time. And I really think I mentioned this earlier, but it first started finding a real home in the metagame when everyone got incredibly carried away trying to deal with Mage and Priest, and it was all Cult Neophytes and Ogomancers and everything else that was running the metagame, right? And then suddenly Rush Warrior showed up and said, well, I only play like 6 spells in my deck, so I don't really care about any of those tech cards. I'm just going to play these efficient minions and ruin you.
Right. And I do think we have hit a point in Hearthstone where everyone's playing sort of understated minions as well, right outside of Rush Warrior, of course. So suddenly, if so many decks are playing understated minions and you just play a good minion curve with like pretty beefy things, you will win a good portion of games because you just have stronger onboard presence, which is what this Rush Warrior is all about. But it's going to have to now contest with Token Druid here from Viper, and it's a deck that is able to do so, not only just because of Blademaster Samuro, which we can see on the far left of Maverick, but just that rush ability and just the fact of how often this deck can actually stick a minion on board nice and early and then use it to try and get multiple trades against Token Druid.
Yeah, a few things to take care of here just through the early turns. Viper choosing not to play Nature Studies on 1, reason being he was going to play Guess the Weight on 2, so he didn't want to potentially float that 1 mana, right? Because his Guess the Weight would end up being discounted, costing 1, but there would be a good chance that he wouldn't spend that 1 other mana on anything on the following turn. Also, Viper is going to learn a lot about Maverick's hand over the coming turns, because Maverick 1-kept in this matchup, and I would say there's a very exclusive pool of cards that you keep in this matchup. Generally, Rakara, Parade Leader, Bumper Car, and of course, the Blademaster Samuro. So as he starts to see that left-hand card not be Parade Leader, not be Rakara, not be Bumper Car, those cards might get played, but they won't get played but from that far left spot where the card was kept. I think Viper can start developing a pretty strong hand read. The Blademaster Samuro is the card being kept over on the far left. I think it'd be interesting to see if there's any particular plays targeted at playing around exactly Blademaster Samuro. But the bigger question, I think, remains, how on earth does Token Druid play around Blademaster Samuro?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is Samuro doesn't just beat Token Druid straight up, right? No. If it is buffed, obviously with conditioning, that can be a huge factor. But for example, let's look at the board Viper made in the previous game, right? Like dealing 2 damage to the board doesn't help versus a Gibbling buffed board, right? Or even just any of the gloat flies being buffed in any way. It softens the board, but it won't clear it up. So Viper still has time. It's still a problem, but he does have time to maybe take this slower and just say, actually, I'm going to make a huge board at some point in the game, and you won't have enough minions or enough just attack to actually clear it all off.
Yeah, what Maverick would need in that position is his Talented Frenzyist, which gives the next Frenzy effect that goes off that turn plus 2 damage in order to clear up the rest of the board.
Here.
I'm not too young to fight.
Yeah, this is the danger moment now, and you can see Viper even wins because Token Druid doesn't have too many great ways to clear this off. Luna is in hand there for Viper, so that's a big deal. But he can kill the Rakara, but already this bumper car now is gone from an annoyance to a threat, right? Dealing 2 damage, that's pretty significant.
Yes. Viper will do what Token Druid does, though, and just kind of blow straight through it and hope that he can overwhelm, which he's looking in pretty good shape to be able to do here, especially having picked up the additional Innovate now. Does have the discount to consider. If he plays Lunar Eclipse, he will go down to 2 mana, still be able to play Pride's Fury, but his ability to innovate anything out at that point is limited.
And this is the question point here, because on paper, Soul the Forest looks pretty good too, right? And then he can go for Pride's Fury next turn. But actually, yeah, I like it because it's, even if Viper's got the knowledge of Samuro, it's 4 mana. That's the whole turn. It's not been buffed. So okay, you poke 1, and then Samuro, well, that doesn't clear the board. And then suddenly, Viper can then push with Pride's Fury or even Thorngrove Sentries into Innovate Pride's Fury next turn.
Yep, exactly.
Move.
Yeah, I was about to ask the question of, like, is this where that potential read does come into play that I was outlining earlier? But I think even if that is in the case, you did a great job of outlining why this play is still better. Because you could understand on the surface, right, and say, well, if you have the read on Samuro, just play the thing that gives all your minions lots of health, right? And then Samuro can't clear it. But as you quite rightly said, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Samuro just does not have an effect on this board regardless. Although Viper would have you believe that it's absolutely game-losing in this position.
It has reduced his board down significantly, but
yes,
again, with Thorngrowth and Pride's Fury, like, that is still a significant board, and this Samuro is a 1/5 now, right? The threat, the thing has happened. The frenzy effect has gone off. It's just a 1/5. The bumper car, a little bit annoying again, but you can even trade that off if you wanted to this turn. So I think Viper's still in a good position, but with the hand that he's got right now, I think it's fair to say that he needs this hand to win him the game.
Chooses to go with the Glowfly there instead for 3 spells, which I can kind of get down with. I do like the Maverick has picked up the cheap removal here with the Murloc, which not only then can address the board cheaply, but also discounts the Tent Trasher, which means that Viper has an enormous swing turn. But I am honestly surprised not to see Viper take the all-in push, really, with the Thorngrowth and the Pride's Fury, which, don't get me wrong, would have been a very all-in push, right? His hand does nothing after that point, which I think his argument is to say that if he doesn't get use out of that Glowfly this turn, then he's not using it at all. But to that, my response would just kind of be, well, fine, right? Like, I feel like that is kind of your push at this point if you're just trying to win the game on the spot with the Pride's Fury. But spacing it out this way, I think his intention is now to get some additional value out of the Gibbling by preserving the rest of the cards with it.
Yeah, and it does make sense, yeah. And you can see how it is going to pay off. But again, it's just... for me, it feels like it's paying off a turn slower than it needed to, if that makes sense, because he could have done a very similar thing the earlier turn and still had, and probably retained a lot more on board as well.
No resources found here from the nature studies. I think would have been looking for fungal, guess the weight, guidance, all that kind of stuff.
I think I like Moon Touched here, you know.
Time waits for no one.
Just so he can pick off him, not necessarily this turn, but he can just like snipe a minion next turn, right? And just push
I agree.
further forward. Because he has his board, right? This is the board. Another Thorngrowth Sentries probably isn't going to increase his win rate that much, right? From this point in the game. So this gets corrupted, of course.
And I love just the progression of Maverick's facial expressions during that turn. Like, he saw the Gibbling come down, he's like, all right, second Gibbling, that kind of sucks. And then he was just watching the board get bigger and bigger, and he was like, all right, I can just about cope with this. Oh, never mind, Pride's Fury. Yeah, that's the backbreaker.
You aren't even ready for
That's a big deal, though. Playmaker, and he got the playable from the stage dive. Sorry, I just went blank on the name of the card. And that's just a huge deal because he gets to make these trades and get more minions to go in with next turn if he can survive.
Job's done.
But I do believe...
No. I think it was lethal before he drew the Pride's Fury, right? But
yeah, there is plenty of damage still over on the other side because even then that was 3, 6, 8, 10, 12 plus the 4. I would have only had 16, I believe, and been 1 off, I think, before the buff on the other side.
Oh, did I like count hero power twice or something? I don't know. Viper, though, taking the victory, and you can see this is what Token Druid does to a man, right? Or one way or the other. You can see what kind of sort of razor's edge you play with Token Druid. If you don't draw incredibly well, have those fungals just refill in your hand, you do hit the point quite often where it's like, okay, I'm making the board. If this dies, I lose. If this sticks, I probably win, right? And you can see the stress for Viper, just this getting cleaned up by Maverick. A little bit too early for him there, but still did make it work, and that second Pride's Fury just ending the game. Leading Viper to a 2-1 lead so far.
Yeah, and I think this turn here that you are just seeing the aftermath of was the most interesting one, where Viper chose not to push all in immediately, instead kind of weirdly took a turn off with a low impact Glowfly Swarm just for 3 flies. All right, but I think that allowed him to space out his resources over the extra couple of turns. And interestingly, Maverick kind of had the hand that potentially could have punished the all-in, but it was also a turn slower than he actually would have been able to deal with, right? Like, the fear of pushing all in is that suddenly there's like a Playmaker, Bumper Car, 1-1 Rush, etc. coming at you the other way to be able to clear up. But Maverick didn't really have that much mana available anyway. And kind of nearly got there with the clapback just by Viper being a little bit too slow. But in the end, I think Viper appreciating that he had plenty of gas to get himself over the line in the end.
And now we're looking at the other side of Rush Warrior at the moment, which is the inclusion of this Overlord Saurfang, the Kresh as well, which again is just, as a single card, is very, very powerful from what you get. I guess the only issue that I've seen with Kresh is that you are paying 6 mana for a card that does nothing the turn it's played, and it's at least in some matchups much lower impact just because of its stat line. If you can buff it with conditioning, it's a lot stronger, of course, but as a general card, it's high value but low immediate impact is one of the downsides, which is why, you know, players who are choosing not to bring it do have some argument there.
Yeah, it's something that can be mitigated a little bit by conditioning. right, where you take understated minions. Because I was interested listening to you talk about how like so many decks play understated minions apart from Rush Warrior. Well, Rush Warrior does also play understated minions, right? If you actually have to play them in their vanilla form, the Rush is kind of priced into the stats of all the minions, right? They are actually understated in general. It's just the fact that conditioning kind of breaks that apart. And it's the same deal with Crash, but the big difference is, as you say, the lack of immediate impact when it comes into play. It doesn't matter how big the minion is, how many buffs you've hit Runthak, conditioning, etc. on it. It still takes a turn to get going. So if your opponent's threatening lethal, if your opponent has a huge board, you can't just drop a giant turtle in it and hope for the best, because it doesn't do anything to address the board state.
Diving straight in, both players have access to Ringmaster Watley, a card that I imagine they're both going to keep here. Viper, of course, already kept it off coin, so pretty likely Maverick's going to do the same when he has access to that coin. So looking good for both players in terms of just guaranteed resources, right? And I think that's where this matchup can falter sometimes in the mirror, when one player just runs dry with the hand, right? You can get those hands that you play out, even if it's an early curve. If it gets cleaned up, you then just waiting on drawing almost exactly Watley.
Yeah, it was interesting, even though so obviously we saw the similarities of the mulligan where they both held on to the Watley. But I think also interesting was the differences in the mulligan, as Viper chose to hold on to the athletic studies going first, whereas Maverick chose to throw it away on coin, which is an interesting difference, because I don't think there's a massive difference in the mulligan win rates between going first and second with the athletic studies. But I do, however, think that Imprisoned Gnarg is a massive get, either, especially going first, but really on either side in the matchup. And I was a little surprised to see Viper not kind of mulliganing a little bit more aggressively for that Imprisoned Gnarg, whereas I think that's probably what motivated Maverick going almost all in with the mulligan, obviously just holding on to the Ringmaster Watley, as you were saying.
And this is something you'll see very often as such a strong play in this matchup, is just playing Parade Leader on 2. It has to be killed, but it never can, right? It's like, it's so difficult to kill this on curve, especially in the mirror match. It's like, it's such a pain, and now Maverick has to decide how he even wants to answer this, because playing his own won't, or often doesn't cut it, right? Because then Viper just plays a rush minion, it gets buffed and kills the Parade Leader, so you're in the same problem once again.
Yeah, particularly because Maverick has the knowledge that Viper played athletic studies on 1, right? So there's almost no world, unless it was an extremely greedy, like, Runthak taken from the athletic studies on turn 1.
Right.
There's almost no way that Viper does not have a rush minion to be able to play out here.
And this is where things already can slip away. A lot of the time, if you're in Maverick's seat here, you would think, okay, he's getting off to a better start, fine. If he's got a minion on curve, that's very annoying, but fine. I have coin Watley, for example, so I can play, if I can just survive I can play the resource game. The problem is, Viper has conditioning and Watley as well, so although it might be a little bit slower, because he's put the pressure on early, it will mean Viper can not only keep up, but actually stay ahead in the game. And now, the choice is subtle.
The choice is indeed. This is a very interesting pick. Obviously, Bumper Car plays very nicely with the conditioning that you have in hand. It also plays very nicely with the ETC that you have in hand. Tent Trasher is extremely good against a very specific sequence of plays that are possible in this matchup, where if he was to just play out Fishy Flyer right now, your opponent has Coin Pirate in their range, right? And then they'd probably be forced to weapon down the 2/3, at which point you can use the discount from your Murloc to play the Tent Trasher and just absolutely dominate the board from that point. But the generically just most powerful pick the card that does the strongest thing option is then Runthak, which is what Viper has ended up on there. So I think that was actually a very solid argument for any of those minions on these turns.
And I'm really interested to see how this goes, because for me, just glancing at Viper's hand when he picked the Runthak, so before the Murloc was drawn, I was looking at Fishy this turn, and even if it dies, you get one back in hand anyway, so fine. Then Watley into Runthak for the absolute max value. The only problem with that is it's a little bit slow, and Viper's the aggressor so far in this matchup. So I can understand bailing on it and just getting the Runthak value now. It's just the value feels so limited compared to what he could have got if he just waited a turn and put that Watley in first.
Yeah, I think because Viper passed, he was always going to be playing the Runthak immediately. Because if he wasn't going to, he could have just played Fishy Flyer same turn where he played the Athletic Studies, right? Because he had 2 mana remaining and his Fishy Flyer would have been double discounted and cost 2. So I think because he passed that turn, he was always intending to use his double discount on the Runthak, which is another reason that kind of motivated that slightly greedy choice to begin with. But now Viper is almost certainly going to win the attrition game here, because not only does he have the card draw with the Watley, which is matched by Maverick, he also has the conditioning follow-up, which is not matched by Maverick on the other side. However, Maverick does currently have a slight tempo advantage, and that is a tempo advantage that he could try and stick from his perspective, because he has powerful plays to follow this up with Tent Trasher into Troublemakers coming up on the following turns. But again, I think from Maverick's perspective, that relies on Viper not having the conditioning here from the other side.
Right. Yeah, and then back-to-back Troublemakers are incredibly difficult to deal with, but the sheer value of this conditioning is ridiculous right now.
Yep.
Ooh,
you can just go like conditioning. I think I like conditioning with ETC and Crab Rider potentially. Okay, Fishy Flyer is pretty clean, to be fair.
I was even working out whether you want to stage dive first and go max screen.
I think that then makes the rest of the turn just a little bit too awkward.
Yeah.
I think either way you were going to spend 4 mana there.
And now this is the scary bit, right? Conditioning's been played safely for Viper, and Maverick's just playing a game against an overpowered opponent, literally, right?
That was the nuts, Raven. Not only getting buffed to 3/5 means it can now value trade 4/3 and clear up the 7/3, which saves Maverick an enormous amount of health on his weapon swing, but it also just perfectly lines up with the Tent Trasher to now come down as a 5/5. It's the kind of turn that Maverick was going to need to bridge that gap to the Troublemakers and Alexstrasza that he now has. But having seen the conditioning, as I mentioned last turn, like Maverick probably feels like that this still isn't enough to be able to consolidate a lead against this hand from Viper, and he is probably quite right.
And now Viper has that choice with the Crash, right? I think this is a safe enough turn to play it. He already has Overlord Saurfang in his hand as well to basically get double Crash value. It's just whether he wants to play that, let Maverick gain a bit of a board, or whether he wants to start fighting back right now. But I do feel if he fights back now, that Crash might never hit the board this game.
Oh, really? I was about to say I'd be shocked to see Crash come down here because it's unbuffed, right? Like, it's so small and inefficient in comparison to everything else in his hand.
It is, but he can make that back up, right? Because the Crab Rider's buffed, the Bumper Car's buffed, so that they can recover. And then he has this Crash for armor and eventually the weapon. Then he has an Overlord Saurfang that's, I believe, also buffed. That makes another Crash that insta-procs it, right? Yes. So it's so much armor and so much health on the board with the double Crash. I think it's worthwhile.
That's fair. That is fair, and you are right. Yeah, I believe the Saurfang is the cutoff point in hand right now, as opposed to for where buffed cards are.
And now Maverick's like, I do not want to play with this tortoise.
I think this is...
and hope this works.
Yeah, this is like phase 3 of the Rush Warrior matchup, right? Where Maverick's kind of conceded that he is behind on value and will soon be behind on tempo. So the one thing he can do is just go as wide as possible, which then puts Matt Viper on very specific outs, right? It's not just good enough to have generic Rush minion that's huge because it's been buffed in your hand. You need to have Blademaster Samuro, or you need to have Playmaker, right? So that you can clap back against multiple minions in one turn. So I definitely do like the option here for Maverick. Just A, be as wide as possible for those reasons, and then B, be as aggressive as possible because you want to force Viper on on the back foot as much as possible to maybe hold out a hope that you can still land an effective Troublemaker on the next turn. Spoilers, you can't.
Yeah, and when you realise that back-to-back Troublemakers aren't enough is when you know the game's gone badly, right? Because that is some of the most powerful like back-to-back turns you can make in terms of aggression and board presence, and it's just not going to do it. And now the Crash is getting the work done, right? Had that turn to warm up and get ready. There's the 8 armor, and then whenever Viper wants now, he can play Salfang to gain an instant 8 armor again.
And also, really nicely done. Not a single target left remaining on the board at 3 health. Even the 4/7 itself gets hit with a weapon down to 4/4 and is not a 3 health target either. This is perfectly engineered from Viper, and I'm sure extremely deliberately so, that the Troublemaker will not be able to make any kind of dent in this board state.
And this is now, we'll just see Viper utilize probably the left-hand side of his hand here to just fully cement the board, right? He has that big buffed ETC, he has the bumper car as well. Might even throw in the Playmaker there just to get maximum trades in. Just destroy this Troublemaker and then push phase.
Is it lethal?
Oh, is it? I'll be honest, I didn't count.
Yeah, I've just been trying to... It's extremely close, because board space isn't an issue because all the 1/1s are able to trade off. I think you have the exact amount of mana you need. Even if it's not lethal, this is still probably the play, just because it just forces so much damage into Alexstrasza anyway while clearing the board. But it's very, very close, if not lethal.
Yeah, because the Alexstrasza, I think, was 2 off. So, yeah. Close, but regardless, it's like you said, it's doing the job, right?
We are down to 14. That's a lot more being pushed. 2 more from the Crab Rider and the weapon going through. Yep, easy does it from Viper. Well spotted in the end. Nice, clean series again. I'm sure. I don't know when this became a part of, Viper's personality, Viper's on-screen persona at least, but I'm sure Viper did not appear this frustrated during games that he was winning by miles. I'm sure this is a fairly new character trait when it comes to Viper in Grandmasters so far.
Yeah, I'll agree. I also think time zone might be something to consider as well, because I don't know about you and I don't know about Viper, but I get grumpy when I'm tired, so it's it's one of those things that might not help in any way. Also, Viper wearing a bit more of a casual attire than we're used to in Grandmasters. Can't blame him. It's late over here in the Europe-ish area, so still though.
Imagine waking up at like 10 p.m. to press your suit for broadcast. Yeah, it doesn't really seem ideal.
Imagine, Sol. You know I have done that many times.
Yeah, and mine. You've done mine for me as well. Yeah.
I'm just a nice guy, and it also pains when people can't iron shirts. But yeah, that was just a solid victory there for Viper in that Warrior matchup. Just looking